Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again in SEPA for transgender women. This is the final session, and we will cover the last session in this presentation. And this last session is on partner negotiation and communication, violence in HIV, and mental health and substance use. And again, remember what SEPA stands for. And remember that with this sessions, we are not actually teaching the content, but we are showing you what we would teach if this intervention was to be available for transgender women. Here again, we would review the group commitments like we had reviewed in the previous two sessions, and we would ask group members if they had any other commitments that they wanted to make in the final session of Zoom. Okay. Again, as we did in the other two sessions, we would also ask each person to recite the confidentiality pledge, keeping everything that happens in the session within the session. Okay. Here we would review the homework, session 2 homework that we had given, clearing up misconceptions about HIV, and then also the optional homework of that, again, if this is triggering to you, definitely skip this little part, but we would do the exercise with examining your sex parts with a mirror, and we would review that experience with the women who opted to do this to the second homework assignment. Okay, so when we talk about violence in the context of HIV prevention, we have to talk about self-esteem. And self-esteem is this unconditional love of myself. And it also means that we can change and develop, and we have knowledge of ourself and everything. And when we don't have these good self-esteem, we kind of have all of these little things that are in the bubble here. I don't know myself. I'm very rigid, not flexible. I'm dependent. I don't take charge. I let someone else take charge. I'm not responsible, and I don't trust anyone. And those are all parts of low self-esteem that can happen to women. Okay, so one of the things that we want to think about and we talk about in the session is, where is our self-esteem situated? Where are we in this unconditional love of ourselves? Okay. We also know that relationships with your partner has an impact on each partner's self-esteem. And here's some of the things that happen with partners who have low self-esteem. They have poor communication. They often don't express feelings. They often consider, what do other people think about me or about us? They don't trust the partner. Sometimes they invade the partner's privacy and the partner's space. They have a lot of conflict, and they're not harmonious in their relationships, and they don't accept differences between the couple, and oftentimes they lack common goals. So those are couples with low self-esteem. Okay. Couples with high self-esteem are different, right? They typically have dialogue, but it doesn't, they have dialogue without avoiding conflict, but the conflict that happens doesn't, have to be explosive conflict. They're open with their feelings. They have mutual support with each other, but they don't become codependent on each other. They respect each other's individuality, right? They look for self-knowledge. All right. They live with the rules and agreements of the relationship. They're monogamous, they're loyal, they're trusting. All right. And they try not to, and they avoid dependency and control, being dependent on the partner and trying to control the partner. Okay. So what are the factors that influence or affect a relationship? We've already talked about self-esteem, and we would talk about each of these at length and ask women to give us an example of, trust, of honesty, of communication, flexibility, and responsibility. And it would be interesting, to get women's input on what each of these mean and how they could affect a relationship. Okay. So one of the things that puts people at risk for intimate partner violence is kind of starting a conversation with a partner about HIV prevention, right? Um, and HIV we know is difficult to trust because it causes partners to question each other's faithfulness, all right? Um, it can also make you think that you don't trust the partner or the partner doesn't trust you. But really, the only way to take care of yourself and protect yourself and your partner is to strengthen your communication with each other. And hopefully, through this session, we would teach women how to strengthen their communication with their partners. Okay. So, what's the difference between the two types of communication? First of all, there's verbal and nonverbal, and we would explain the difference between verbal and nonverbal. And we would also talk about assertive and non-assertive communication. And you can see these little QR codes that would lead you to these videos, or there's also these YouTube links that you could take a look at these videos that you wanted, if you wanted to, and they would show you the difference between assertive and non-assertive communication. Okay. All right. So how can you maintain good communication with a partner? Again, um, if we were giving this session live, or we were giving this session on Zoom and women were actually communicating or actually participating, we would demonstrate with two people of how to effectively communicate with each other. And it would begin with like looking and, getting good eye contact, putting yourself on the same level where you don't stand above or sit above somebody, talking directly to each other, right? Expressing yourself clearly, and then using assertive responses. And we would teach women how to use all of these tactics to maintain good communication with the partner. All right. We would also teach how to express your feelings, right? All right. Expressing your discomfort directly, not being secretive about the fact that you are uncomfortable, right? Trying not to harbor resentment, okay, or have these what we call long faces, looking sad, all right? Actively listening, all right? Before you make an accusation or before you accuse someone, try to describe the whole situation and get the other person's point of view. All right. When it does come time to argue, always defend your position. And as a couple, you should always try to find a solution together. And again, we would talk about these in a group setting. Okay. Now, there's some common errors that happen in partner communication. And the first one is what we call the absolutionism communication, or absolutist communication, where one person is always right. Okay. The second is what we call extremist communication, all right, or black or white communication. It's either one or the other. There's no in between, it's either one or the other. Third one is called mind reading, where you try to guess what your partner is thinking when you really don't know. And one of the other mistakes that happens in partner communication is using you instead of I. Okay. When you use you, you are accusing the person. Okay. Where when you use I, you direct the attention, okay, to the other person. And I'll give you an example here. You made me feel sad. Okay. That puts the accusation on the person. Instead, you would say, I feel sad, or my feelings were hurt. And that allows you to take ownership of the fact that you were communicating and you were being assertive with your partner. Okay. Here is another exercise that we would do with the women. It's called Dare to Say It. All right. And here we would, as you can read here, we would think of something that you would have to say to your partner, but you never had the courage to do so. And we would ask you to write that down on a piece of paper, right? And then write the name of your partner on the name tag, all right? And then choose one of the women in the group if we were doing this in a live group, okay? We probably wouldn't be able to do this on Zoom, but we could probably make it work, all right? And let this other person represent your partner. And then using an assertive tone, not an argumentative tone, but assertive tone, and using I, talk to your partner about what you have to say in that. All right. And that's one little simple exercise that we can teach women how to better communicate with their partners. All right. Very simple, but this would work very well in a live session. And we could probably make this work in a Zoom session also. Okay, so we also have to teach negotiating skills, all right? And so we would want to teach the women here that if you're going to communicate something with your partner that might end up in a conflict, it's a good idea to plan ahead, right? It's just not something that you just decide you're going to do right now and you do, you think ahead, right? As we talked about before, you use I statements. You plan ahead, you practice what to say. Maybe you have a really good friend that you would want to practice this communication with before you actually do it with your partner. All right. Listen to tone of voices. All right. Of course, being very aware of your voice and being very aware of your body language. Okay. Know what you want, know how to say it. All right. Say how you feel, listen how your partner feels, he or she feels. Okay. All right. If there is high risk behavior, refuse the high risk behavior and explain your reason for it. Okay. And so we give you a little example here. We give women a little example. I think it's important to use a condom. It would provide both of us with protection. Okay. And so here we would be able to role play with women and teach them how to use these negotiating skills. Okay. And then we would also have, a scenario. And then we could also, give them some of these other um, um, phrases here about what you can do to kind of increase your partner communication and increase your your participation in safer sex behaviors. Okay. We would also go through some assertive response scenarios here. There's 3 of them that we would go through with the women. And here we would probably divide them into groups. And if we were in a live session, we could also do this with Zoom by putting people in different groups. And we could have them to work on these assertive response scenarios and then bring it back to everybody, and then we could all discuss them together. Okay. As you can see, there's 6 of them, and based on time, we would go through, all 6 of these. And if we would have, maybe 12 women in a group, it would be nice to put 2 women in a group and have them each do the scenario. But if we wouldn't have that many women, we would let the women choose which scenario they would want to address. Okay. Um, so now we have to talk a little bit about intimate partner violence. Sometimes it's called domestic violence. And what is it? You can see here it's all form of abuse that take place in a relationship between members of a family that cause physical, even sexual or psychological damage to another member of the family. Okay. Violence affects the whole family, including anyone who lives in the household where violence is occurring. If there's any children, if there's any parents or other adults, it definitely affects, of course, the person who's experiencing the violence and the perpetrator, the person who's doing the violence, but violence has an impact on the whole family. Okay. And, some of the things that happens to the family, there could be physical damage that happens. There could be psychological damage in terms of suffering and sadness, other psychological damage like constant suspicion and fear. When there's violence, people get very afraid. It decreases family communication. People are afraid to talk because anything can trigger a violent event. And if people stop talking about important topics like, HIV prevention, substance abuse, then those behaviors may increase because they're not being talked about in the family. All right. So this is how do you think family violence affects health? And it's all of these ways here that it does. Okay. Um, Here's another thing for us to think about in the transgender community. It's what's the source of violence in the transgender community? Well, first if it comes from community violence, right? It's violence directed at a transgender person because of their identity. And if you remember in the questions, one of the questions that I ask you is that, in the past month, have you been have you experienced violence from somebody in your community because of your transgender identity? And what we're assessing for there is community violence. And then we look at family violence, like your family of origin, your parents. Was there violence in that relationship? Okay. The third type of violence that can happen is violence from a partner or intimate partner violence. And then violence from survival sex work, all right? Either violence from a client or violence from a boss or pimp, all right? And then we would ask people to think of any other examples of violence that specifically affects transgender women. Okay. And the reason that we're talking about this in this session is that you see here that trans people experience violence 2.5 times the rate of cisgender people. And remember the term cisgender people. Cisgender means, for example, I'm a cisgender male. That means that I was born a male and I identify as a male. Okay. People who are transgender have 2.5 times the risk of violence risk of experiencing violence compared to cisgender people. So unfortunately, it's something that we have to talk about when we talk about transgender health. Okay. All right. So how common do you think it is? There it is. It's 2.5 times more common. And here's some more awful statistics about all types of violence. Look at this. Almost half of transgender people have been sexually assaulted at some time in their life. 58% of transgender people, when they interacted with law enforcement, they were they had some type of violence, whether it's verbal, physical, sexual, or just some other type of mistreatment. 24% said they had severe physical violence from a partner, and that's much higher than 18% in the US population, right? So we know that like typically about 18% of women, of cisgender women, let me use the term correctly, 18% of cisgender women in the general population experience IPV. In transgender women, it's 24%. So it's a lot higher. And then among trans people, 54% experience some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime. So these are much higher than cisgender people. So unfortunately, as I said, this is why we got to talk about this issue in this session for transgender women. Okay. All right. So at this part, we would see a little scene, and I'm not going to show them the movie in this, but I'll provide the link for this if you want to see it. This could be a very triggering scene for you. So we would give you the little disclaimer. In the next movie, you will see a transgender woman talking about the unexpected death of one of her transgender girlfriends who was killed by a client. All right. So if you believe that seeing this scene will be uncomfortable for you, don't watch the video that will be attached. It's not going to be watched here. Okay. But if we were giving this as a group session, we would let those people who might be triggered by this, let them step out for a minute while the rest of us would watch the video. Okay. And again, if this is triggering to you at any point, please don't watch it, but we would allow women who wanted to speak to us about this afterwards, we would definitely be available to talk about this. All right. So here's the scene. It's called Violence. It's from Pose, and it talks about the death of one of these transgender women. Okay. So one of the things that we have to think about when we talk about IPV or this what's called the cycle of violence. And we would talk about the first phase where there's a lot of tension that leads to the second phase where there's an episode of acute violence. And then the third phase, there's the honeymoon phase where everything is kind and nice again and everything. And that usually lasts again until there becomes growing tension in the relationship. So we would like women to be aware of these, the cycle of violence because it can be broken in any place. When you learn to, recognize what's going on, it's sometimes easier to break the cycle of violence that happens. Okay. So why do, what goes on here, in intimate partner violence? Well, you got the perpetrator, you've got the person who's willing to, abuse another person. That person may have a sense of ownership over the survivor. Okay. They may feel that they're not going to get punished for it. They may feel that they're justified in inflicting the violence. They oftentimes, they all the time inflict violence because it's a sense of control and authority. So that's what the perpetrator looks like. Okay. And again, you got violence in, a family or in a community. Violence affects our entire society. Okay. So what does the person look like? What's the person look like who experiences violence? Now, we don't call this person a victim because this is very disempowering language, but we use the term survivor. So the person who experiences and survives intimate partner violence, they often are a very unconditional people, right? They just accept people as they are, right? They don't have, they don't put a lot of demands on people. They're just very kind and unconditional people. They also have a lot of love for the person who may be violent to them. Okay. They also may decrease their own personal values because they want to meet the needs of the person who's doing the violence. Okay. And after a while, you also, the person who's experiencing the violence, kind of loses the ability to register how serious the abuse is. And so all of these things look like, if you compare the what the perpetrator looks like to the survivor, you can see how these things match up and how, somebody who's unconditional is the perfect person for somebody who wants to take control. And you can see how these things align and they kind of, these two things come together, unfortunately, to form violence in a relationship. And again, we have to leave the message that if there's violence in a family or violence in a community, it affects the whole community. Okay. So what should we do here? So some of the things, first of all, methods of protection, disclosing violence to someone. If it's a family member, if it's law enforcement. I know transgender women are often very reluctant to go to law enforcement. Um, and I understand completely why. And a lot of people are afraid to go to law enforcement. They're afraid they won't be believed, or they're afraid they might be harassed. And I'm not saying, and I'm not advocating that if you're experiencing IPV that you have to go to law enforcement, but at least disclose the violence to someone, a girlfriend, a family member, a trusted friend, somebody that you can disclose the violence. Because the first time you disclose it and you talk about it, you've already kind of started the healing process and kind of you've started a step toward getting away from that violence. Secondly, is to develop a safety plan, a plan of action. What do you need If you have to leave your house right now, what do you definitely need? What forms of ID do you need? Do you need some money? Do you need some credit cards? All of those things need to be thought of. And then where are you going to go? If you do escape, where is it going to be that you got to know? All of those things have to be thought out of, thought out carefully beforehand so that you have this safety plan in place. All right. You also want to hide any objects that can be used against you. If there's weapons in the house, get rid of them or hide them. All right. Have phone numbers. Right now, because of cell phones, nobody knows anybody's phone number, but have phone numbers written down somewhere where you can access them and have some cash ready in case there's an emergency and you need to get out. Okay. Um, if there's violence going on in the home, you know, go to rooms where there's locks and keys. Definitely get out of the kitchen area. There's a lot of weapons in the kitchen area, and you want to get out of that area. Okay, if at all possible. All right. Is there any emergency equipment that you need in the house? For example, do you have a home alarm that you could use, or emergency, a way to notify 911, for example? Are those things available for you in the house? And also think of a place where you're going to go. If you do have a safety plan, like I said earlier, one of the things that you want to think about is where you're going to find refuge. Are you going to go with family? Are you going to go with friends? Are you going to go to the neighbors? That has to be thought out of, and that's all a part of your safety planning that needs to happen. Okay. So these are all the ways that, when you disclose the violence, you have to be ready to leave if needed. Okay. All right. So this is where we would end our presentation, and we would look forward to a brighter future. Um, and we start this with SEPA. We have this little thing that we call SEPA for transgender women. All right. So the S stands for say, I am who I am, and I start with I. Remember, that goes back to using that I in your assertive communication. E goes to explaining. All right. I listen to the tone of everybody's voice in which they speak to me. All right. P, I will plan for my future to achieve what I want from life. Okay. And A, assertively, I can communicate and design strategies to care for myself. Okay. All right. T, I can thrive to be the best that I can be. Okay. G, I can get the resources that helps me thrive and grow. Okay. And W, I welcome a healthy new life. Okay. And we also have a closing video here. Again, I'm not going to play this video for you, because it will take up too much space on the recording, but it's another happy this time. All right. The other two ones were not so happy, but this is another clip from the TV show Pose, where it's called The Category is Pride, and it celebrates everything that is prideful about the transgender community. Okay, and this is a very uplifting video. So if you get a chance, watch this video that when I posted. Here we would also present certificates for people who completed all the sessions, all 3 sessions of SEPA for transgender women. Okay, and here also we would ask women to complete the evaluation of the session. Okay. Here we would offer time that if you want more information or believe that you need referrals or any other services, please stick around afterwards and see one of the facilitators, and we would refer you to our resources. Okay. This concludes session 3. We thank you all for evaluating session 3 and participating in this evaluation. And I want to thank all of you for helping us improve these 3 sessions. We could not have done this without the input of all of you, and I value all of you, and I value all of your input. You have helped us tremendously to make this program much more stronger and much more applicable and useful and helpful for transgender women. So much love to everyone who's participated in this. Again, I thank you for your time that you've spent, the effort that you've given in helping us evaluate this, giving us critiques, giving us feedback. Yes, this works. No, this doesn't work. Add this, take this out. I love all of you for doing this for us. So thank you very much. And this ends our session. And please don't forget to schedule a telephone call, an email, or a text with me so that we can do the evaluation of this session. Thank you all so much for your support.